Hey y'all, we are on day 8 of our 90 days in the Psalms. I'm so excited for what God has given me for today. Let's go ahead and get into it. But first, as usual, go ahead, click that like button, click the share button, comment, talk to me. I want your feedback. I want to know what you are getting out of these Psalms. And also, if you aren't subscribed, go ahead and click that button, turn on your notifications so you are in the loop every time I post a new video. And let's go. All right, so today we're only doing one psalm, but this psalm is amazing. It's long, but it has so much to it, so we're really going to dive into this one. Psalm 18, I'm going from the New King James Version. I will love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength in whom I will trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. The pangs of death surround me, and the floods of ungodliness make me afraid. The sorrows of Sheol surround me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried out to my God. He heard my voice from his temple, and my cry came before him, even to his ears. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the hills also quaked and were shaken, because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils, and devouring fire from his mouth. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also, and came down with darkness under his feet. And he rode upon a cherub and flew. He flew upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his secret place. His canopy around him was dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. From the brightness before him, his thick clouds passed with hailstones and coals of fire. The Lord thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice, hailstones and coals of fire. He sent out his arrows and scattered the foe, lightnings in abundance, and he vanquished them. Then the channels of the sea were seen. The foundations of the world were uncovered at your rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of your breath of your nostrils. He sent from above. He took me. He drew me out of many waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy, from those who hated me, for they were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my support. He also brought me out into a broad place. He delivered me because he delighted in me. The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness. According to the cleanness of my hands, he has recompensed me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord, and have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his judgments were before me, and I did not put away his statutes from me. I was also blameless before him, and I kept myself from iniquity. Therefore the Lord has recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands in his sight. With the merciful you will show yourself merciful. With the blameless man you will show yourself blameless. With the pure you will show yourself pure, and with the devious you will show yourself shrewd. For you will save the humble people, but will bring down haughty looks. For you will light my lamp. The Lord my God will enlighten my darkness. For by you I can run against a troop. By my God I can leap over a wall. As for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is proven. He is a shield to all who trust in him. For who is God except the Lord? And who is a rock except for our God? It is God who arms me with strength and makes my way perfect. He makes my feet like the feet of deer and sets me on high places. He teaches my hands to make war so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. You have also given me the shield of your salvation. Your right hand has held me up. Your gentleness has made me great. You enlarged my path under me, so my feet did not slip. I have pursued my enemies and overtaken them. Neither did I turn back again till they were destroyed. I have wounded them so they could not rise. They have fallen under my feet. For you have armed me with strength for the battle. You have subdued under me those who rose up against me. You have also given me the necks of my enemies, so that I destroyed those who hate me. They cried out, but there was none to save, even to the Lord, but he did not answer them. Then I beat them as fine as the dust before the wind. I cast them out like dirt in the streets. You have delivered me from the strivings of the people. You have made me the head of the nations. A people I have not known shall serve me. As soon as they hear of me, they obey me. The foreigners submit to me. The foreigners fade away and come frightened from their hideouts. The Lord lives. Blessed be my rock. Let the God of my salvation be exalted. It is God who avenges me and subdues the people under me. He delivers me from my enemies. You also lift me up above those who rise against me. You have delivered me from the violent man. Therefore, I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the Gentiles, and sing praises to your name. Great deliverance he gives to his king, and shows mercy to his anointed, to David and his descendants forevermore. All right, so we're going to look at this psalm first as David saw it through his eyes as he wrote it in poetry. And then we're going to take a look at it as a prophetic text, meaning a messianic text, a text that actually can be applied to the life and death of Jesus Christ. So first, let's get into what David is talking about. You can find this psalm in 2 Samuel 22. It really is it's like a summary of praise, a summary of all the victories that God handed to David, a summary of everything that God has been to David. And we see David list all of these things that God has been to and for him. He calls him my strength, my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, whom I will trust, my shield, the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. And then we see David go into this like awesome metaphoric imagery that shows God coming down to rescue him. So we have in this imagery, we also have some contrasts that mark the difference between God and what is happening here on earth, right? So we see the fire, and then we see darkness, the fire lighting up the darkness. We see God being strong enough to bend the heavens, yet he is light enough to come down on the clouds and on the cherub. He describes God here also as a God of vengeance. He takes out all of David's enemies with arrows, right? But then we also see God as this tender, loving father who pulls David out of the waters, and he's like setting him into the space in the gentleness of this strong hand. And I also want to point out here that as we see God manifest in all of these things, this is also a parallel to how God showed himself to Moses and the Israelites during the Exodus, right? We know that God came down as fire. We know that there was an earthquake. We obviously know that God parted the waters. There was a cloud that went before them, right? So this is what David is actually referencing in this imagery, and he knew that people would be able to identify with it because they had already seen it, or they had already heard of that in the story of their ancestors and how God brought them through. And then we see, as we did yesterday, that after this like very vivid imagery, David goes into this piece about righteousness, which can seem a little weird given what he just said. And we know too, and we've talked about this before, that David was not perfect. Obviously, he was not like this very righteous person that didn't make mistakes. But I think what we can do here is interpret it and identify with it as David having the right intentions, right? It's like he has this picture of God and he's showing how great and mighty he is. And then he's like, God is doing this because my intentions have been upright, because I have stood with faith, because I have faced these enemies, these situations with trust in God. This is how he can come down and do this for me. And then from that transition from God defeating David's enemies to David defeating David's enemies. And I think, well, I'll get into this in a little bit, but I want to start with verse 32. And even though David is saying now, I overcame these enemies, he's also giving credit and glory to God. So starting with verse 32 again, it says, God armed him with strength. Then he made his way perfect. God made his feet like the feet of deer. He set him on his high places. God taught his hands to make war. He could bend a bow of bronze. God gave him the shield of salvation. God held him up with his righteousness, made him great through the gentleness, enlarged his path under me, is what David says. And then he also says that he made it so David's feet didn't slip. We also see that God subdued his enemies so that David could then deal the final blow to them. So we see in this one psalm the dichotomy between God doing stuff, I don't want to say because I don't want you to get the wrong picture, but God taking things into his own hands and God arming us with what we need to overcome it on our own, but God is still in it, right? So the way I think about this is this. We know when God does something on his own terms, right? Usually it comes in the form of a miracle, a sign, or a wonder. We are just completely, we haven't touched it. We haven't done anything for it. God just comes down and does something and leaves us in awe, right? But more often than not, we see God strengthening us, God giving what we need, equipping us to do the work that he has called us to. And I think this is showing us that it is our responsibility as God's agents to give the credit back to God, right? We know that some of the things we have accomplished, most of the things that we have accomplished in this life are not according to what we have created ourselves, that it is God working through us, and we often need God's intervention to continue moving forward. And so I don't think David here was trying to pull the attention off of God, even though he switched to kind of his own abilities. But I think what he was highlighting was God came down and did this awesome thing, but look, God is still amazing and awesome in what he does through us, right? He is God alone, but he is also, his goodness and glory is made perfect when he uses us as well. And then to end this psalm, per usual, David ends with praise, and that just solidifies the glorification of God that happens in this psalm. So now I want to switch over and I want to go into the text as prophetic or as messianic. So I'm going to start with the 4th verse here because the allegory is pretty clear. The 4th verse says, the pangs of death surround me, and the floods of ungodliness made me afraid. So we know that Jesus came to defeat the grave and overcome spiritual death, and David and humankind, us, were all subject to and surrounded by the enemy, surrounded by the pangs of death, surrounded by ungodliness. And through Jesus, right, through his coming into the world, through his death on the cross and his resurrection, he ultimately defeated that surrounding, that encampment. We no longer are encircled with sin. We are in sin, we do sin, but we are no longer strangled by it, suffocated by it. Jesus died so that we have victory over that feeling, right? And then when we go to verses 7 through 19, when David is describing God coming down from on high to defeat the enemy, of course, this is a perfect parallel to Jesus coming down to earth right? To save, to defeat the enemy. And then with the resurrection, everything was made perfect. Matthew describes in chapter 27, as we look at this imagery of God, we also see the imagery actually happen with the death of Jesus Christ. So in Matthew chapter 27, the day that Jesus died, it says that darkness came over all the land, something that David described. And then we also see that Jesus breathed his last breath. The earth shook and the rocks split. So that earthquake. And then with the resurrection in chapter 28 of Matthew, it tells us that there was another earthquake and the angel of the Lord came down from heaven and his appearance was like lightning. So again, we have the same parallels of the imagery of God to what happened on earth after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. If we move into verses 25 and 27, we also have a parallel parallel to the Beatitudes, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. In verse 25 and 27 in this psalm, it says, with the merciful you will show yourself merciful, with the blameless man you will show yourself blameless, with the pure you will show yourself pure, and with the devious you will show yourself shrewd. For you will save the humble people, but will bring down the haughty looks. And in Matthew 5, in his sermon, he says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. So again, it is this almost identical parallel. And then finally, if we slide down to the last verses of this psalm, in verse 49, we see something that is pretty rare in the Old Testament, and that is a reference to the Gentiles. And of course, as we know, Jesus came not just for the Jews, but for the Gentiles. Faith is for all, and it's pretty hard to deny any reference here because Paul actually uses it in Romans 9 as a defense for Jesus being both for Jews and Gentiles. And finally, in verse 50, David references being a king, and that David and his descendants and his anointed will all be blessed by God. And obviously, this applies completely to Jesus because not only is Jesus king, but he was also a descendant of David. So it all works together here. Now, if I could just finish with this. This is what God wants us to get out of the Bible. Even when we are reading the Old Testament, it doesn't matter what book you're in the Old Testament, there is always an allusion to Jesus Christ. And so when we read, we really, and I know I've said this before, I'm just kind of nailing in the nail a little bit further, that we have to look for Jesus in the entire book. We can't look at it as something separate because then we'll miss that meaning of it, right? There's always a sacrificial meaning to it. There's always a resurrection meaning to it. There's always a sin meaning to it and the defeat of sin, right? So even when we're talking about enemies, like in this case, we can allude to sin, right? And that's also how we put ourselves in the Psalms. Like, we don't have to be talking about a literal enemy, like, we don't like whoever it is down the street. That's not really how we should be looking at it. We look at it as the sin that is continually popping up in our lives, the sin that is continually after us, the plot that the enemy has to take us out of this world, knowing that we have benefit, knowing that we have purpose, knowing that we are God's children. The enemy, the devil, is what is always after us. And he uses sin to get us, right? So that is what we are looking for when we look through these Psalms and say, David says something like, let me just pull it up. When he says something like even I have pursued my enemies and overtaken them, that we can read as I am going after this enemy, and I will overcome whatever he throws at me. I will trample on them. I will use all the authority that Jesus has given me to overtake the plot and schemes of the enemy, right? We aren't talking about physical wars here. I hope we're not. But even so, we have to look with that frame of mind, always with a messianic frame of mind. And so my revelation for today is actually not having to do with that, but I just want to talk about God's strength, right? Here in this psalm, David says the word strength 4 times, obviously translated strength 4 times. But he references God giving him strength in one way or another an additional 6 times. And that has very deep meaning for us, right? That God is strength. God gives strength. He pours out his strength. He is the source of our strength. We are weak without him. And through his strength, like David says in the psalm, we can leap over the walls that are in front of us. We often look at walls as being stoppages, as being higher than us, taller than us. We have to figure out, people use the words getting around the wall or pushing through the wall. But David says here, God will give you the strength to just go over the wall, to leap over the wall, meaning you clear it completely. You don't even have to worry about it. You are going over it, right? And also, what David is saying here is that we can overcome literally anything with the strength that God gives us. He gives us the strength to fight, not to run away. David didn't say that he let God take care of it while he sat back and chilled. He was saying he took it also into his own hands, that God brought them to the point where David could step on their necks and deal the final blow to them. And that is what God does to us. He hands stuff to us that seems bigger than us, that seems stronger than us. And all we have to do is take the initiative to cut off the head of whatever we were facing. And it is an allegory also to David slaying Goliath. God handed him Goliath's neck, and all David had to do, honestly, was take the sword and cut off his head. It was not David's strength that slayed Goliath with 1 stone. Think about that. It was God's strength. It was God's strength that drove the rock into Goliath's head. And after God had done that, David was the one who had to complete the mission. If David had not cut off his head, we don't know that Goliath wouldn't have gotten back up. And that's what God wants us to do. He wants us to just cut it off at the neck, destroy it, so that you don't have to deal with it anymore. And we have to have the confidence that, yes, this thing is bigger than me. Yes, this thing is stronger than me, but God is giving me strength. And you know what? God is going to bring this thing to a place where we can stomp on it, to a place where we can overcome it, to a place where we can destroy it once and for all. And we know through that we will give God the victory, because we know it wasn't by our own strength. It wasn't by our own mind. It wasn't by our own creativity. It was because God handed it to us. And that is the confidence we have in God. So thank you for sticking with me through this long psalm. I got kind of geeked out a little bit. I love it. I am just so in awe of the response I have gotten out of these psalms. So I'm going to keep going. I cannot wait to see you again tomorrow for day 9. We are tackling one more psalm again. So I will see you all per usual. Read through it again. Get your own revelation. Comment. Share. Let's do this together. All right. Love y'all.